We're doing Shin Chav Dalet Halacha Beis today. So before I start, I have to tell you that in Shin Chav Hey, that's the next one, there's going to be two separate rules for how to combine different batters. And I have to tell you what it's going to say in just a second, which is there's going to be two different ways to combine. One is to combine to make a shir challah. We have so much flour, and now we're chayav in challah. That's one way. And the other thing is, once you have a shir challah, when you mafresh, things have to be somehow combined, what's called mukaf, in order to do the hafrasha. It's two different sets of rules. That's what Shin Chav Hey is going to be about. We're going to talk about it. Shin Chav Hey Halacha Beis. We'll talk about it over there. Okay. Our siman is much longer than that, and our siman is really to do with the first of those things, which is how do you make sure you have enough to be chayav and challah. Last time we spoke about how much you need to have, this many pounds or this many cubic inches of flour, but now we're talking about how do you combine different things together to make them into a shir challah. There's a lot of examples in this thing. In the siman, we're not going to do them all. So this time is about that. Okay? And one last thing to tell you before we start, which is that the rule is whatever is considered to be combined to be a shir challah, however the rules are, that something is considered combined, if two minim are combined, min A and min B, two different grains, then you could be mafresh from one grain on the other. If they're not considered combined for the shir challah, then you can't be mafresh from one on the other. Okay? What is or is not considered combined, that's the whole siman is about, the whole rest of the siman is about that. But if it's combined, you could be mafresh from one or the other. If it's not combined, then you can't be mafresh from one or the other. Okay, now, the Shulchan Aruch Halacha Beis, to me, I found very confusing, very complicated. There's three different cases the Shulchan Aruch is going to give. He does them in the order that's a very logical, if you're writing a Shulchan Aruch order, which is, first he brings two halachas, two cases that are based on Mishnayos, basically, based on the Mishnayos and the Yerushalmi, and then he brings the last case that's only basically in the Tosfos. Okay, so those are the three cases. But for our sense, to help make sense of it, to understand it, we're going to do it in exactly the opposite order. Okay, and then at the end, when we're finished, we'll get back and say, do it, when I summarize it, I'm going to summarize it according to the Shulchan Aruch's order, which is exactly what the Shulchan Aruch is trying to summarize it. Okay, but so when we get to the end, we'll summarize it in the order like the Shulchan Aruch has it, but otherwise we're going to do it backwards. We're going to do it in the reverse order. Okay? And to add to all the complications, we're going to find something else in Siman Shin Chav Hey, the next Siman, that there's another kind of Tziruf that's not brought in this Siman, and that's called Tziruf Sal. Okay, you may have heard of that. Okay, that somehow things can be Mitzuruf in yet a different way, not one of the three ways we're going to talk about today, a different way. That's very similar. The way when Tziruf Sal works is very similar to the second case in our Shulchan Aruch. Okay, and we'll hear about that again in Shin Chav Hey. That's going to be Halacha Al Mitzvah. Okay, so we start like this. Mishnah says, if a person, the Mishnah in Terumah says that if a person has two different foods that are climbing with one another, okay, apples and oranges, okay, they're climbing to plant them next to each other, then you can't be mafresh truma from one of those on the other. Okay, so if you have a pound of apples and a pound of oranges, you can't be mafresh truma from the apples and the oranges, okay, because they're climbing zebazeh. So Tosfos says a question. Tosfos in Menachos says a question. He says, the Mishnah says, a Mishnah in the beginning of Kilayim says that chitim and kusmin is spelled. So wheat and spelt are considered Kilayim zebazeh. Okay, that's just a rule of Kilayim that they're Kilayim zebazeh. So Tosfos says, well, if they're Kilayim, and we know from the Mishnah in Terumah that things that are Kilayim, you can't be mafresh truma from one on the other. Well, if so, you shouldn't be able to be mafresh truma from wheat onto spelt. And Tosfos has many more examples of things that you shouldn't be able to be mafresh one to the other. Fred Tosfos that the Gemara right there that he's talking about, the Gemara in Menachos, says that you could be mafresh from chitim onto kusmin, from wheat onto spelt. The Gemara says that. He says, what's going on? The Mishnah says that they're Kilayim. We have another Mishnah that says when things that are Kilayim, you can't be mafresh truma from one on the other. So then how come you're allowed to be mafresh challah from chitim onto kusmin? What's going on? Why? And he has many examples. That's not the only example. That's one of the examples. The Gemara says you can be mafresh from one on the other. And they're all Kilayim. There are all kinds of cases that are Kilayim. You can be mafresh one or the other. That's Tosfos' question. Okay, Tosfos gives two answers. Okay, one answer we do not accept. But that is that he says the rules for Hafrashas Truma and the rules for Hafrashas Challah are not the same. Even though Challah is considered Truma, but for Truma is chayiv when it's an item. An apple is chayiv in Truma. Grains are only chayiv when they're made into a batter. And therefore, it doesn't depend on whether they're Kilayim when they were planted. It depends on whether they're similar when you make them into doughs. So the rules are different. The rules for Kilayim apply to all kinds of Hafrashas Truma, but they don't apply to the halachas of Hafrashas Challah. That's one answer, Tosis. That's not acceptable halacha, although you're going to hear about this later on. What I just said to you, this part of Tosis, it's going to sound familiar later on when we say it again. Okay. The other answer of Tosis is what we do accept, and he says like this. I'm telling you the way the Shach explains it. Look at what he says like this. The regular rules of Hafrashas Challah are exactly the same as Hafrashas Terumah. Whatever is considered Kilayim, you can't be marvash on the other one. And therefore, the regular rules are that there are three groups. Okay, there are three groups of things that are not Kilayim. Chitim is by itself. Wheat is by itself. Kusmin, that's spelt, and Shipun is rye. So rye and spelt, that's another group. They're not Kilayim. They can be marvash on one or the other. And the third group is Tziruf and Shibal, barley and oats. Those two are also a group. Okay, so we have three groups. Each can marvash on the other one, and that's the normal way that you do Hafrashas Terumah. Okay, we didn't get the answer to this, but that it's true. We follow exactly the rules of Kilayim. Okay, these two chitim is just for itself, rye and spelt for themselves, and oats and barley for themselves, in these three groups, and that's actually the third din in the Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to read you the Shulchan Aruch at the end. That's the third din in the Shulchan Aruch, that each of these three marvash on each other, rye onto spelt, barley onto oats, and wheat on by itself. That's one case. So what's the answer to the question? So why does the Gemara say that you can marvash ones and other ones? So Tosfos says that there's a special chumrah for hilchos terumah, for hilchos challah. Okay, that's a chumrah, a derisive big chumrah, and the chumrah is like this: for regular foods that are chayiv in hafrashas terumah, you follow these regular rules. By challah, the Torah says, "Reishus arisosechem," the first of your batters. The Torah is telling you that there's something special about batters over here. When you make a batter up, and not basically, when you create a batter. And therefore, so what the Torah is saying is like this. The first thing you look at is there a shir challah? Is there a shir challah according to the regular rules, which is the things that are Kilayim zeh. So let's say if you mix rye and spelt together, you can have a shir challah, but if you mix rye and wheat together, you can't have a shir challah, because rye and wheat are Kilayim zeh. If, according to the regular rules, you did not end up with a shir challah, according to the regular rules, you don't shir challah, then there's a secondary way of looking at it. The Torah says, be machmir, and look at it the second way, as a batter, as a risosechem. Look at it the second way. If according to the second way it'll be chayiv in challah, then it can also be chayiv in challah. So first you look at the regular way. So let's say, for example, it's all wheat. Let's say it's all wheat and it has a shir challah in that, then it's not the tziruf for something else. But if the wheat by itself does not have, and the wheat only with the spelt will have a shir challah, then the secondary set of rules, I didn't tell you what they are, but there's another set of rules that tells you there's different ways you could be mitzurif. There are other ways to make mitzarif, not just by the rules of Kilayim. Challah has a special kula, a special chumrah, that it could be mitzurif in a different way, and you could be chayiv in Hafrashas Challah even with different combinations.
So you don't need the first way, really.
The first way is what you look at first. Okay?
Why? Because the second way is more
broad. Okay, and the answer is before I tell you
whether it's all wheat or
okay, before I tell you the nafkamina, the reason is because the etzem challah is truma, and it follows the regular rules of trumas and righteous. The Torah is being macro and saying you could also have a second way to it. Okay? And it comes out, what you're saying comes out for the following nafkamina. The Taz says it, the Shach sort of says it, which is like this. What I'm saying to you is first you look at it through the regular rules of Tziruf, which is the rules of Kilayim. That if you didn't qualify because of that, then you look at the second rules, to see if it should qualify for that. So what happens like this? Let's say I have a batter that has a shir challah of wheat, but it does not have a shir challah of spelt. Okay? Let's say the shir is 5 pounds. It has 5 pounds of wheat and a pound of spelt. Okay? So from the perspective of the wheat, there's a shir challah that does not need the secondary way of tziruf. It has the first way of tziruf. It's qualified based on the first way of tziruf. So the wheat is chayiv in challah by itself. And if you want to be mafresh challah from a different batter of spelt, you couldn't. Because wheat and spelt can't be mafresh one on the other. They're not the same. They're in two different categories. Wheat is by itself and spelt and rye are in themselves. So wheat and spelt can't be mafresh on each other. So if you have a batter that has enough shir challah for wheat, but not enough for spelt, the wheat, you could be mafresh from the batter itself, of course. You could be mafresh from a different batter of wheat, but you can't be mafresh from a different batter of spelt. Because from the perspective of the wheat, there was no tziruf over here. But the spelt is not chayiv in challah by itself. There's only a pound of spelt. There's not enough to be chayiv in challah. So the spelt needs wheat in order to be chayiv in challah. According to the secondary rules, I didn't tell you what they are yet, but according to the secondary rules, spelt and wheat could be mitzurif, kusmin and chitim could be mitzurif. So from the perspective of the spelt, there was a tziruf. So that the spelt is also chayiv in challah, but it's chayiv in challah from the second layer, not from the first way it's here, from the second layer. The spelt is taka chayiv in challah. So the spelt, you could be mafresh on the spelt from wheat. You could use a wheat batter to be mafresh on this spelt, because this spelt is only chayiv because it was connected to the wheat. Okay, the wheat, you can't be mafresh on the wheat from a spelt batter, because the wheat didn't need the spelt. But you could be mafresh from wheat on the spelt batter, because the spelt only became chayiv through the secondary way. The secondary way means wheat and spelt are mature, and therefore you could be mafresh from wheat onto this spelt. So if we were using, in our case, if we use the back of Hafrashas, we have just the batter just of wheat. A batter just of wheat. If we had one of just wheat, let's use tevel matzahs. We have just tevel matzahs just made out of wheat. Those matzahs could be mafresh on this, but
even on the spelt part.
Even on the spelt part, if the spelt was not a shear. Only if the spelt was not a shear. The spelt was not a shear needs the wheat to become chayiv, then it's considered mature to the wheat, and you can be mafresh from wheat on this thing. Okay.
If the spelt was a shear, then
right.
Yeah,
because then you qualify by itself. Then qualify by itself, then spelt and wheat are not the Kilayim there, so then you can't be mafresh from one on the other. If the Kilayim, then I would be mafresh from one. Okay. So what's the rules? What are the more common rules? I told you that according to the Arisa Seichem rule, it's more flexible. It allows more tzirufim than the Kilayim rules. Huh? So Festus says, you want to know what those rules are? He says, I'll tell you by showing you a stira that Yerushalmi asks. Okay? Yerushalmi asks a stira. The very first mission in Challah says there are 5 grains that are chayiv in Challah. These 5 grains, wheat, rye, spelt, oat, and barley. I think I got them all. These are chayiv in Challah, and they can be mitzaref one with another. Mashma, anyone can be mitzaref with any other one. It just says they're all mitzaref with one another. They can all be mitzaref. Sounds like they're completely in any way you want to. They can be mitzaref. So, in fact, Yerushalmi, at the end of Masechtas Challah, in the 4th parak, towards the end of Masechtas Challah, it gives all these kind of rules of what can be mitzaref with what. So, in fact, Yerushalmi, what's going on here? Is it like the first Mishnah that said everything can be mitzaref with anything, or is it like this later Mishnah that says no, they can only be mitzaref according to certain combinations? Okay, that's Yerushalmi's kasha. And for Yerushalmi, kan be Nashuch, kan be Ballul. Okay, one Mishnah is talking about Nashuch and one is talking about Ballul. What does that mean? The Mishnah at the beginning of Challah is talking about Ballul. The different types of flour were mixed together thoroughly. Okay, they were mixed together. You took all the flour together, made one big batter, or you took 2 big batters and you mixed them together and you made them again into one big batter. In that case, everything can be mixed with anything. The Nashuch, from the word Nashika, where they're kissing each other. Okay, which we're going to see in Shulchan. That means is they're so connected that if you pulled one apart, it would drag some of the other part with it. Okay, they're like really stuck together. If you pulled this one, some of that other one would come along with it. If that's what's going on, then it's considered attached, but not so attached like Ballul, and therefore only certain ones can be mature. Okay, that's what Yerushalmi answers. So so before I tell you what Nashuch, what exactly what's going on over here, that Yerushalmi is telling us, just as what's going on is important for the next segment. Yerushalmi is telling us that the lowest level of being connected is Nashuch. Okay, Nashuch, when they're touching each other so closely, they pull from the other one, they came apart. That's the lowest level amount of connection. It's of course not Ballul, but it's the lowest level of connection, and it's actually a machlokes in the Ballul, in Shulchan. What happens if 2 things just touch each other? Let's say I have a pound of flour, of wheat flour, batter, another pound of wheat, another pound, another, all touching each other, but not Nashuch. They're just touching each other. Okay, so it's a machlokes whether that's considered attached or that's not considered attached for Hilchos Challah, for Tziruf to be Tziruf, and we paskin that it's not the Rambam, Shulchan, and many others paskin that it's not considered. You need dafka Nashuch, which is what you're trying to say. That Nashuch is the lowest level of attach. If they're just touching each other, but they're not Nashuch, they're not considered attached. Although Tziruf Sal, I told you, we're going to have Shulchan that Tziruf Sal works without Nashuch. But otherwise, for regular things, if you have just a bunch of those next to each other and they're not Nashuch, then if they're just touching but they're not Nashuch, then they're not considered attached. Okay, so back to Toshas. Toshas is saying this like this.
So 2 balls of challah are all bets are off.
2 balls of dough.
Dough, separate pan.
Are not.
All bets are off.
They need to be chayiv right. If there's a pound of this and a pound of this, it's not considered chayiv.
All sheets.
Correct. Not all sheets. All sheets is lahalacha. The sheet in the Gemara that's just touching is enough, but we don't pass like that. We pass it that it has to be Nashuch. It has to be so touching that you
at least Nashuch.
At least Nashuch. Okay. So now, so what Tyson is saying is like this: in order to these two Mishnayos that either say Ballul, everything is considered combined, or Nashuch, many things are considered combined, all assumes that there was not a Shir Challah. If there was a Shir Challah in either one of them, you follow the rules of Kilayim. So the first thing we do is we look at the rules of Hilchos Kilayim. If in Hilchos Kilayim they're considered, if there's a Shir Challah, we follow the rules of Kilayim. If there's no Shir Challah in either of the batters, then we follow these lower rules, which means to say it like this. When we're following the rules of Aruch Sechem, then what we do is we say, do they look similar or do they not look similar? Okay, how do we define if they look similar? So it's like this. If I'm Ballul, if I mix the two doughs to get the batters together to the point that it becomes one big glob of dough, then of course it looks the same. The wheat part of it and the spelt part of it look exactly the same because it's Ballul. It's all mixed together into one big batter. If it's all mixed into one batter, of course it looks the same. It is the same. It's one big glob of dough, so it looks the same. So if we only care about whether it looks the same when it's a batter, so then it does. It qualifies because it looks the same. So we say it's Tziruf. That's the bowl. All the things work. If it's been Nashuch, if they're just sitting next to each other, so there's a bowl of wheat and a bowl of spelt, and they're packed in Nashuch, they're touching each other very closely, then it depends. Some batters look similar, and some of them don't. I don't know how they did. I guess it was based on, I actually was thinking of making batters to see why the Gemara says some look like each other, some of them don't. I don't know. To me, they probably all look the same. We have to try one to see why. But the Gemara says certain groups, we'll see in a second what they are, look similar and don't look similar. So then, if they're sitting next to each other, then they need to have a certain similarity to them, and then there are these more liberal rules of what's considered to look the same or not. Okay, so finally, I'm going to have to finally tell you what are the rules. So the Mishnah says two rules. The Mishnah says two rules. The Beis Yosef brings from Yerushalmi and Rishonim other rules that go along with those. Okay, the Mishnah says two rules. Okay, I don't know if you want to do this. You want to do this? I have a few versions of this piece of paper. That would be there. This is if you got a pen and paper, you can fill this out with me if you want to. Okay? I'm going to give you a different version of this in a second. I have pens. Oh, there are pens there. Okay. We're doing the little box, the square on the top. Okay? And those letters on top stand for wheat, spelt, barley, rye, oats. Okay? Wheat, spelt, barley, rye, and oats. Okay? In the top box, the one that's a square. Okay? So the Mishnah says like this. The Mishnah says two rules. The first rule the Mishnah says is wheat can only combine with spelt. Okay, wheat cannot be Tziruf with anything else. Again, these are the Aruch Sechem rules. These are not the regular Kilayim rules. Wheat can only combine. So I put a check into the WS box. Okay, and all the other W boxes get an X in them. Okay. X. Okay. So you look at the square. That's the cube, the top one, the cube. Okay. So it says that wheat, spelt, barley, rye, oats. Okay. So in the combination where wheat mixes with spelt, that's a check. According to these rules of Aruch Sechem, they can combine.
Wheat mixes with spelt is a check?
Yes. The Mishnah says it's blank. It's for you to fill it out. Yes.
Fill it in, please.
Fill in the blanks. So when wheat mixes, the next one I'm going to give you is going to have it filled out. Okay. So wheat mixes with.
There's two places where wheat mixes with spelt.
Same thing. It says here, you put a check on both sides. Yes, it's exactly the same. Yes. And then, but wheat doesn't mix with anything else, not with barley, rye, or oats. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says. Wheat only with spelt. That's what the Mishnah says. Achitim and akusmin. Okay, the next thing the Mishnah says is that.
What's what? We consider spelt and we consider wheat.
Yeah. We talked that once, Pesach time, about shibon and shul being oats, but everything else is pretty straightforward. Okay. The next thing, the other thing the Mishnah says is that spelt.
They're making gluten-free Cheerios.
They already made it. We have it in my house.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Baruch
A lot of talking.
So, and the other thing the Mishnah says is that spelt can be Tziruf with anything. Okay, so all the spelts mixing with anything, the Mishnah says is fine. Okay, now that's the part that the Mishnah says. Okay, the other rules are source of those rules plus of the Yerushalmi, and that says like this. I'm not going to give you all the gory details what the Yerushalmi says. Okay, it says like this: barley can combine with anything except for wheat. Okay, that doesn't say in the Mishnah. That's based on the way Yerushalmi say that barley goes with anything except for wheat. Rye could go with barley and spelt.
That's it.
And rye, shipon, could go with barley and spelt. Okay, and there's a machlokes in Yerushalmi whether rye and oats could be Tziruf. And so Machlokes HaPoskim, which we pass like that, Shulchan Aruch means both days. The Shulchan Aruch assumes that it cannot be Tziruf. The Rambam says that it could be. Okay, he brings the Rambam, but he assumes that it cannot be. Okay, so I put a man for that. And Machlokes whether rye and oats could be Tziruf. And then the last one, which you should already have everything filled out by now, is that oats could be Tziruf with barley and spelt. Oats could be barley and spelt. And again, the same Machlokes whether oats and rye could be Tziruf. Okay, so that's what it says here. Now, I'll give you, either you want blank or filled out. You can choose which one you want to. There's two versions of this, and if you can paste it there. Two versions of this one, okay? We'll read the Shulchan Aruch inside, and you'll see where things fit in now. Okay, there's one filled and one empty, whichever you'd rather. What? One of each, okay?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't give you highlighters, but you could use my colors if you like. Okay, so let's read the din in Shulchan Aruch. And the din says, do you have one? I got it. I'm good. Okay.
This is the same sheet, just one color.
One's filled in and one's not filled in. Okay. And the Shulchan Aruch says like this. Usually we read the Shulchan Aruch first. Here we're reading it backwards. Because now we're going to read the order of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the opposite order of what we said when we spoke about it. You only got one?
Here's
I got another. No, I have two blanks.
Are we reading backwards?
No, we're reading it straight. Chameshes minute two mitzarfen. The 5 minute two could be mitzaref, which is like this. If there's only if the shir challah chameshes run 5 quarters of a cow, if the shir challah is only from the 5 together, mitzarfen, they could be mitzaref. Okay, they could be mitzaref, which is the first mission in Mesechtes Challah. It says all chameshes minute could be mitzaref one another. That's talking about when you mix them as flour, or the Taz says when you mix them as a batter also. Okay, so that's the case. If you look on the bottom, the bottom lines, is case number 1. This is the first case of Shulchan Aruch. There's no shear of any of the grains, and they're thoroughly mixed together. Kashir and Kemach, that's the Ballul. Okay, so for this case,
no
rules. Everything is mature. Okay, so in mine, I don't know if you have the color in front of you.
Typical bread that's made in this way with oats and this and that is all done before.
The Ballul, but it's only if there's not a shear challah. If there's no shir challah, this talking about so far, if there's no shir challah, you're going to see in a second, believe me. It's talking about there's not a shir challah. If there's no shir
total.
What do you say?
Total.
Right, but does not have, each one of them does not have a shir, so then they can all be mature per ball. So there's checks straight across. Okay, no matter what, they can all be mature per ball. If you the little box on the top, I know you figure that. WS means wheat with spell. WB means wheat with 10. There's 10 cases here. Okay, all 10 cases you could be mature. That's the Shulchan Aruch. But if you made the batter separately, you weren't with the wheat together. The aim by shear, and there's still not a shear. Then with the acher, and you stick them one onto the other one. Now over here he doesn't tell you what it means to be Nashuch. He doesn't tell you what it means to be medavik, but in Shin Chafei he speaks it out. The Taz is really clear in Shin Chafei that udavka means that it's so stuck together that if you pull it apart, a piece comes off. Then Eim with Starf and El Bezah Seder. Then the only tziruf can happen in the following order. And look at that in this Shulchan Aruch that has bullets. Look at that.
where?
In here we have bullet points. He can tell you the bullet point. Now, in the Shulchan Aruch, the old-fashioned version doesn't have bullet points, but in our version it has bullet points. And here it goes. This okay. On the paper we're using it has bullet points. Okay, so this seder is like this. It says Hachita im Tafel al Kusman. Chita and Kusman can only be mature with Kusman, so I put a check by the WS, by wheat was spelled. We're in the second case of the Shulchan Aruch now, and the rest of the wheat combinations do not work. HaKusman mitzarefin kol echav echad. Kusman can be mitzaref with anything. Okay, so the next bunch of boxes, the next 3 boxes of Kusman spelled with all the 3 things on mitzaref. Has'arim mitzarefin min hakol chutz mimachitim. Barley can be mitzaref with everything except machitim. Shipah and rye mitzarefin machitim sa'arim mikusman. Rye can be mitzaref with barley and spelt. V'loyim shibol and shuva machitim, but not with oats and wheat. Okay, so those are the list of cases. Rambam, Kusin v'shibol l'shul v'shipah mitzarefin. According to the Rambam, spelt oats and barley, and rye to be mitzuref. Some of those had already even the mechaber agreed to, but the Rambam is adding is that rye and oats be mitzuref. Okay, so that was the second case of Shulchan Aruch. It was the box we did before, and it's the second one in the middle here. It came out that 6 cases could be mitzuref, not 10. 6 could be mitzuref, and 1 was a machlokes. Okay, you could I counted this. Okay, 6 could be mitzuref. So it's a little, it's less, it's not all 10, but 6 could be mitzuref. Now the last part of the Shulchan Aruch, Losh kol minim in levada v'yesh b'kashir. If you did the lisha in a way that there is a shear of each one, the rights lahavrish min zeh al zeh. You want to be mafresh from one on the other one. You could only be mafresh from what's considered the min. That means is what's the min for Kilayim. What's the Kilayim min of each other, which is ketzad. Chitim cannot be with anything else. Chitim is by itself. The kusmin v'shipon, it's spelt and dry. Mafrishim mizeh al zeh. You could be mafresh from one or the other. That's one combination. Also oats and barley could be mafresh one or the other. So of the 10 cases, we only have 2 that could be mitzurv. Okay, only 2 of these cases could be mitzurv. According to this case, in this case, it's talking about that there was a shir challah. So when there is a shir challah, we follow the regular rules of Kilayim. The regular rules of Kilayim, the Shulchan talks about it whether they can be mafresh one or the other, but it really means is also whether they can be mitzurv to one another. They don't combine, they don't need each other to combine. So Tziruf is not really such a question, but they can't be, the nafkamina is that they can't be mafresh from one another. We follow the rules of Kilayim that things are not considered mitzurv, they're not considered mitzurv except unless they're not Kilayim zeh. Okay, so we did.
So you saying this is being itself also to be Mechayim and Challah?
Right. Yes, right. The rules are the same, but it's not a nafkamina whether it's Chayim and Challah because he said each one had a shir challah. So what do I tell you? So if it's one does and one doesn't, that the Taz talks about that, so that in one direction there's from Hilchos in the case of Yisrael, wheat and spelt. Okay, wheat and spelt. The wheat has a shir challah, and spelt does not have a shir challah. So from the rules of Kilayim, that's not a tziruf. From the rules of Rishis Sechem, it is a tziruf. So what do you do in that case? So
he said again, they're not touching the garnish.
They're Nashuch. No, they are touching each other. They're Nashuch.
I'm talking about they're not touching.
They're not touching.
At the end, the wash called min means they're not mixed.
They are not. They are Nashuch. They're Nashuch or they're Ballul. Okay, it's not talking about
First wash them out,
they put them to each other. Then you put them together. Yeah. If they're not even Nashuch, then they're not even a shayla here to talk about.
He said he didn't keep my chitma.
Right, chitma mitzvah. But what the Shulchan's case, that's correct. Then they wouldn't be mature if you had a pound of wheat and a pound of wheat. They're not mature. That's the Nashuch. Right. But the Shulchan, when he's talking about whether it can be mafresh one or the other, he's not talking about from the angle of Ali Mitzurv. You don't care about whether it's Mitzurv because it has a shear. So he's talking about just if you can be mafresh one or the other. Okay? Being mafresh one or the other or being a shear are the same thing. We said it before we walked in. Being mafresh one or the other or being a shear are the same thing. Those rules are the same. So if the person had, here's the case. He had Nashuch of a shear of wheat and not a shear of spelt. Okay, he had a shear of wheat and not a shear of spelt. So from the wheat's perspective, it has a shear challah. It cannot be mitzurv with the spelt because it's they're Kilayim zeh. They can't be connected with one another. So the wheat can only be mafresh on this. You can be mafresh on this from wheat. You cannot be mafresh on this from spelt because the spelt is not mitzurv to the wheat. They're Kilayim zeh. Okay, mafreshim mizal zeh. From the spelt's perspective, it is mitzurv to the wheat because the spelt needs the wheat in order to have a shir challah. So the spelt is mitzurv to the challah because in the rules of Aruch in the rules of batters, it would be considered mitzurv. So the spelt is mitzurv to the wheat, and therefore you could be mafresh from wheat onto the spelt.
But you can't use spelt.
But you can't use spelt on the wheat because the wheat doesn't need the spelt. Had there only been a half a share of spelt and half a share of wheat, if they were both at only half a share, then you could be mafresh from spelt on both. Then you could be mafresh just on spelt on the wheat side of it. Because in order to wheat to be chayiv, it needed the spelt, so then you can mafresh from the spelt on it.